Hi everybody, welcome back to my Dungeon Boss Hero Priority Guide. Today we are going to be taking a look at the Fire Heroes, and we're going to see how they stack up compared to what we think versus what we can actually calculate mathematically. So what I wanted to reiterate before we get too far into this is just to clarify a little bit, because I think with the first two episodes of this, some people might have gotten a little bit off track in terms of what I'm trying to do here. Remember, I'm not trying to pinpoint the exact best hero of any particular color, because as of right now they vary so much from hero to hero and from color to color and their overall playstyle. We can't really quantitatively determine which of a particular color is better. We're going to start getting into that a little bit more specifically when we start looking at the various classes like the healers and the warriors and such like that. But what I'm trying to do right now is to show you the reason this is called the Hero Priority Guide is because we want to basically say which are the best heroes overall, which we are trying to look at that ultimately, but we want to see in relationship to how good they are in the game, how easy or how high of a priority should it be to actually focus on those heroes. So that's what I'm trying to get at here as far as these priority guides, is not who's the best, but maybe who should you be working towards first. Because if we have someone who has a hugely high priority and they're also on your one of the best lists, obviously if they make both of those lists, they're going to be really good heroes and ones that you should actually focus on. So when we actually get into this first section in terms of the initial assessment, this is basically what we're trying to assume. So these are what we're going to consider as the sort of best heroes to start with. So if we can get the people on this best list to match up with those on the highest priority list mathematically, then we know that we got a really, really solid hero. That's what we're ultimately looking for. So based on my initial assessment and my experience, I think a lot of people will agree with a bunch of these here. We kind of have a couple of things that are happening here. If you look at the top five, Torchy, Koros, Astrid, Pignus, and Furnace, these guys here are in themselves basically PvP superstars. They all have a really critical role. Torchy, maybe not so much in PvP, but Torchy's just all around a good hero. But Koros is pretty much PvP meta right now. Astrid we see a lot on PvP defense because of the caster buff. Pignus I see on PvP defense all the time for high crit teams like Kira and Black Diamond, and Furnace is pretty much a staple of both attack and defense. So those guys are used all the time. If we look at the middle five tends to be a bunch of guys who are really strong in the campaign. Squinch is part of the Goblin team, so he's running campaign all the time. Nitpick, because he's a caster and has burn, is pretty much used all the time. There's a lot of people that swear up and down by Ember Sanguine as far as a red healer goes. And then Manglejaw is just overall decent. He's kind of a shifty little guy that, for whatever reason, dodges a lot of stuff. I know he's kind of shifty, but he's just a decent healer. And then Cobressa, she's kind of just kind of in there with her, reptile nature. If you run her with the reptiles, obviously she's pretty good. And then the bottom five are kind of the ones that it's no surprise that we see Rogar, Nimriel, and Abigail all on this list. Those are three of the very first heroes that you're going to get, so it's no surprising facts that we see these guys towards the bottom. Lupina, she's just overall fairly squishy, even with the implementation of her epic. There's not a lot of people actually using her. I've seen a few people use her on PvP defense, but honestly, that's almost a waste of a hero in my opinion. Now, if you'd like to prove me wrong, feel free to do so, but Lupina on PvP defense is sort of a waste of a hero. And then Ignis the Mad. There was basically a long time running joke that Ignis was pretty much one of the worst in the game. He was right up there with Alexandros, and at the time Zerk was absolutely horrible. But then they kind of reworked casters and he got a little bit better. His pretty much only saving grace is that he can deal out an absolute ton of damage. So first up, let's take a look at the epic status. Now, for whatever reason, the fire heroes, they kind of stand alone as far as epics go. I'm not sure what the devs had in mind here, but any of us who've been keeping track of the epics are wondering, why are we not releasing more light hero epics? It seems like every other week a new fire hero is coming out, and pretty soon a lot of them are all going to be released here. So when we look at the epic heroes, essentially Torchy is a big one, and Squinch is probably a big one. The other four are really kind of negligible. In actuality, I've only really leveled up Torchy and Squinch because Rogar is just, he's garbage. I just do not use him. Nimriel, she's not really that important except for lower levels. She's good for initial PvP. And honestly, Nitpick is just too squishy to run in any type of a dungeon, really, except for one that really requires him. So, and then there's Lupina. Some people are kind of hit or miss with Lupina. So in actuality, this list really only includes 2 people, in my opinion. But in the interest of scientific consistency, we're going to include these guys as all being epic. So probably a better benchmark then is going to be a little bit availability. The reason I put Squinch on here as a double star, I mentioned this in one other video a couple weeks ago, but Squinch has the single highest availability of tokens in the entire game. There isn't one hero that has the same number of tokens than him. He has 9 different dungeons in both normal and challenge mode. So in terms of farming, Squinch is very easy to get. So you can kind of guess where this one is leaning because of his high availability of tokens and the fact that he's epic. That gives him a pretty strong case for being a high priority. And I'm certainly not going to dispute that at all. A couple of the other ones, though, we see Rogar and Abigail as both being readily available. So we have to keep that in mind as well. Next up, we are dealing with overall energy usage. Manglejaw. I put him as a double star. I didn't realize this the first time that I took all of my notes. Remember, I swore up and down by High King Valken as being one of the best in the game. Technically speaking, Manglejaw is actually tied with Valken for the best single energy use in the game at 11 total cooldown, which is pretty amazing. So in terms of a campaign dungeon, you literally cannot go wrong with Manglejaw if you're running green dungeons, because his skills are going to be up all the time. So as far as long dungeons go, Manglejaw is going to be top notch on that front. From there, both Torchy and Furnace both have really, really low energy costs. They both have 12, so that gives them a pretty strong case. And then Lupina and Koros both have 13 total energy. I think they're 13. They might be, no, I'm sorry, they're 15. So the fact that Koros is kind of a meta in PvP and he's got low energy costs, that actually makes him a good candidate for PvP offense, as well as running some dungeons if he can survive the glass cannon aspect. Next up, let's take a look at traits. Remember, I identified traits as being the more traits you have, generally the more useful they are. So this one is kind of interesting because a lot of the red heroes are extremely well balanced as far as or maybe not well balanced, but very, very similar. So essentially, Furnace stands alone as having the most number of traits. He's the only red hero that has 6 traits, and then pretty much everybody else has 5 traits. So pretty much everybody in their own right is pretty decent as far as traits go and their viability. I included a couple of other ones on here because of their lack of traits. So if we look at Rogar and Nimriel, they have 2 red down arrows. They are the absolute worst when it comes to traits, and it's no surprise. And like I said, those are 2 of the very first heroes that you actually get. Rogar being the first hero, and Nimriel usually one of the first 3-star heroes you get. I think she starts out at 3 stars, but one of the earliest heroes that you actually get. And they actually only have 2 traits each, which, comparatively speaking to everybody else in the game, is just absolutely awful. They could easily add some better traits. Like, for example, Rogar, one of his traits is Perfect Swing, and that's great and all, but he has almost nothing else. It's like he could have a dwarf buff or anything else that would make him more useful. And then probably one of the only blemishes on Squinch is the fact that he doesn't have as many traits as anyone else. Squinch and Abigail both have a low number of traits. So Next up, we're looking at how useful are those traits. We only have a couple of people that actually have traits that benefit the entire team, and it's no surprise here that Pygneus and Ember are on here. Those are two pretty popular ones. We see Pygneus as kind of a staple for running some dungeons because of his extra crit damage, so we see him a lot with caster teams. And then Ember, because she's the only real true red healer, she's very beneficial as well. And then Cobressa, she technically has a heal for the entire team as well. A little bit more on the flexible side is those that have benefits to just certain amounts of people. So we have Torchy, Lupina, Furnace, Pygneus, Ignis, and Nitpick. This is pretty much one of the only places that Ignis seems to shine. But essentially, we're seeing the same kind of couple over and over. We've seen Torchy and Furnace a couple of times, as well as Pygneus, which technically bodes well for them. So where that leaves us overall, what I found with the red heroes is they tended to kind of cluster together. I couldn't get a nice breakdown of a top, middle, and bottom five. What I found out is that Torchy was standalone number one, and based on what I said before, he has a low energy cost, he has a very high availability of tokens, and he's an epic hero, which makes him a top priority early on, and he can be a staple for you throughout the game. So he's one of the few that you get very early and is useful all the way up to level 70. So it's no surprise that he's a top priority here. But then we have this cluster of all people that kind of tied out for rank number 2. And ultimately, when I start getting into these calculations like that, essentially what a lot of these came down to was the variation of energy cost. So when we start comparing them in their own classes a little bit more, we'll start to see these shift out a little bit better and have more true rankings rather than so many ties. What I found staggering about this list here was the fact that Astrid actually came out as the single worst red hero mathematically. The reason being, she has a relatively high energy cost, she has no availability for tokens, and her traits really don't benefit anybody except for her one caster trait. So overall, she's, in terms of usage, mathematically, she's just not quite up there with some of the other ones. Now, in reality, that may not be the truth because her Just a Scratch trait is pretty cool. And she does her provoking attack, and she's got just a naturally high defense, and a lot of people have her with really solid attack as well. So it's not a true indication of how we see this fit. But in the scheme of this particular video, keep in mind that it's not just simply go out and get Astrid and use her. So as far as a priority goes, it might be a little bit more useful to try for somebody else. In terms of tanks ago, Pygneus and Furnace are both pretty decent viable tanks. Obviously with Furnace you need Dagrand or Bauble to heal him, but he's like I said, a main staple in PvP offense, defense, and in hard dungeons like the very hards and the boss mode dungeons. So he's a very useful hero. So middle of the pack, just kind of the only one that stands out is Koros, and that's not really that surprising because if you really look at how people are using Koros, I don't know of anybody in my guild that really uses Koros as a dungeon runner. He's pretty much a PvP offense glass cannon. I see him occasionally on PvP defense, but a lot of people are finding him pretty easy to counter when he's on defense. The only odd ones are when there's, for example, like a Kai and you can't kill him easy, or if they both have Leo and Emily, sometimes he can be a pain there. But honestly, Koros on PvP defense does not frighten me too much unless I can see that the team itself is really powerful. So let me know what you think about this list here, and then, like I said, we're going to ultimately get into the classes as soon as I can here and start comparing them to other people of like nature rather than just red versus red, because remember, there's so much variation with these that it may not be 100% indicative. Like I said, Astrid is a great hero, but maybe there might be better options. Torchy, I'm not going to dispute that at all. I think Torchy is one of the single best heroes in the game. He's great in PvP and in PvE. I definitely recommend him to pretty much anybody. So, any questions, comments, concerns, feel free to leave them below. Otherwise, stick around. And next up is going to be the nature heroes. Thanks.